which is so cold. Bamboo grows so crazy fast. I don't know if you...
The moment Caitriona Balfe took to the stage at the Glittering Stars Around Us awards ceremony, the 7th season of this grand event that brought together not only the most prestigious names in television, but also the most passionate fans, industry insiders, and the voracious press eager for a headline, the room was already tingling with suspense, for this was the night where her name was nominated for Best Actress. Sam Heughan's name for Best Actor, and the expectation, whispered along the corridors of the hall and buzzing across social media feeds, was that the two former co-stars who had once ruled television screens with their unparalleled chemistry in Outlander would finally share a stage again, not as fictional lovers, but as themselves, as two people who had been both admired and mythologized for years. And when Caitriona appeared, shimmering in a lapis lazuli satin gown that caught the purple and white stage lights, her elegance both timeless and fragile, and Sam appeared beside her in a classic black tuxedo with a white shirt that sharpened the angles of his face. The audience could not help but imagine, even hope, for some kind of reunion, some glance or smile that would collapse the years of silence into a moment of reconciliation, because after all, they had been not just colleagues but cultural icons, the embodiment of Jamie and Claire. Their shared story having become something larger than themselves, woven into the imaginations of millions. Yet beneath the dazzling lights, the red carpet's shine, and the orchestral music, there was an undercurrent of unease, a quiet energy that seemed to cling to them as they stood together, Sam's smile faltering at the edges, his body tense as though resisting an invisible weight, while Caitriona's eyes, when they turned toward him, carried the complexity of unspoken things, emotions compressed into a glance that could have been affection, resentment, longing, or grief. And when the master of ceremonies, with a voice polished by years of introducing stars, invited them both to share their thanks on stage, the hall erupted with applause, some clapping for nostalgia, others for the drama of it all, because everyone understood the symbolic magnitude of this moment, the return of two figures who had not been seen together in years. Yet no one could have anticipated what followed, for as Caitriona stepped to the podium first, her posture poised, her expression calm, but quivering at the edges, she began, with words that seemed almost routine, expressing gratitude to the fans, to the production teams, to those who had supported them through the years, before pausing, her gaze sliding once more to Sam, and in that pause the air grew dense, the silence stretched taut, and then came the words that would echo across the world within hours. Sam, you don't deserve my love. Words that sliced through the glamour and shattered the illusion of poise. Words so stark and unfiltered that for a moment even, the cameras seemed to hesitate, zooming in on her face, as though to confirm whether what had been heard was real or an auditory trick. The audience froze, the initial cheer collapsing into stunned silence, the atmosphere suddenly so stifling that one could almost hear the collective intake of breath, and on Sam's face the shock registered instantly, his expression paling, his eyes swelling with tears he fought to control, his forced smile crumbling into raw anguish as though the stage lights themselves had turned cruel, illuminating not triumph but tragedy. Whispers rippled through the room, mingling with the sound of his heartbeat that seemed to reverberate even through the microphones, and in that moment the carefully curated boundaries of professionalism dissolved, leaving two human beings standing exposed before a crowd of thousands and an unseen audience of millions watching at home. Sam bent slightly toward the microphone, his hand trembling as it gripped the stand, as though desperate to hold on to something solid amidst the collapsing ground, and with a voice heavy with emotion, he managed only one word, "Cat," before breaking into silence, the nickname carrying with it years of intimacy, years of shared history, a word that alone spoke volumes yet failed to stop the torrent of grief rising within him, and as tears streamed down his cheeks, illuminated by the unforgiving lights, the sight of the strong, confident actor so often cast as the resilient Highland warrior now undone by vulnerability left the audience both devastated and mesmerized. And if Sam's pain was visible, so too was Caitriona's, for though her words had cut with severity, her own eyes glistened, her throat tightened, and her body stiffened as if paralyzed by regret. For in speaking the truth of her anger, she had also unleashed the raw wound of her heart, exposing not only her disappointment in him but also the fragility of her own longing. And when she turned her gaze back to the crowd, the mask of composure cracked, revealing eyes red with unshed tears, eyes that betrayed a youngness, a helplessness that seemed incongruent with the poised woman she had always been, making her appear not as the dignified star but as someone suddenly stripped bare, standing before the world with nothing but her pain. The audience, once so eager for glamour, now sat suspended in a heavy silence, some weeping quietly, others averting their gaze out of discomfort, many whispering among themselves in tones that mingled shock with sympathy, while backstage producers scrambled to decide whether to cut away, whether to preserve the dignity of the event or allow the drama to play out. And ultimately the camera lingered, capturing each devastating second as though transfixed, recording Sam's sobs, Caitriona's stillness, and the unbearable energy between them. When the assistant stepped forward to offer the microphone back to Sam, he refused it, shaking his head, his body heavy with shame and sorrow, before turning slowly, wiping his tears with the back of his hand, and retreating awkwardly from the stage, his movements unsteady, his posture collapsing under the weight of humiliation. And though the ceremony continued, though the orchestra tried to swell the music to cover the rupture, nothing could erase the imprint of what had just unfolded. The truth revealed in a moment that blurred the line between performance and life, a truth that brought audiences back to the fictional days of Outlander, when Jamie and Claire would argue fiercely, yet always reconcile, when their love, steeped in sacrifice and time, was portrayed as unbreakable. And now fans struggled to reconcile the image of those immortal lovers with the reality of two people broken apart, their connection severed not by narrative but by life, leaving the haunting contrast between fiction's eternal devotion and reality's painful impermanence. And as whispers turned into tweets, as tweets turned into headlines, the phrase, "You don't deserve my love," spread like wildfire, dissected, debated, transformed into memes and think pieces, while fans clung to their memories of the past, replaying scenes from the show as though to remind themselves of what once was, of the passion that had seemed immortal. And yet, amidst the storm, one truth emerged, that even stars, even the faces we project our fantasies onto, are not immune to heartbreak, to anger, to the collapse of love. And in that hall, illuminated by white and purple lights, what the world witnessed was not a performance, but the raw tragedy of two people once bound together, now torn apart in public, their pain forever imprinted on the collective memory as one of the most shocking and human moments ever to unfold on an award stage.
Crazy. And then I went back and I got the part. We started pretty immediately and I just had the best time. I was playing a young mom.
But it was so real, so unavoidably real that even when the curtain of the awards night had fallen and the stage lights dimmed, Caitriona Balfe could not find peace. For as she sat alone in her dressing room, her trembling hands pulled the mirror closer until her own reflection stared back at her with an intensity she could hardly endure. Her lips shaking as she whispered the question that had already been echoing in her mind like a haunting refrain. Why did I say that? And though her voice quivered, her eyes burned with a clarity that was both accusatory and pleading, because deep within she knew she had not simply spoken out of cruelty or impulse, but out of a reservoir of pain, disappointment, and longing that had been festering for years, carefully hidden behind professionalism and smiles, concealed beneath interviews and rehearsals, yet never truly gone. And tonight, in front of the whole world, it had erupted like a storm that could no longer be suppressed, a declaration that was at once confession and wound, punishment and plea, a paradoxical outburst of love that had been denied the oxygen of communication for too long. She remembered the past with an aching nostalgia, remembered how after the final Outlander shoot they had wandered together through the moonlit streets of Edinburgh, their laughter mixing with the night air, their steps unhurried as though both were reluctant to let go of the fictional love story that had bound them so tightly for years. And in that moment of moonlit ease there had been a kiss, sloppy and imperfect, yet warm, human, and full of possibility, and she had thought then that perhaps what had been written for Claire and Jamie could spill into real life, that perhaps what had begun as on-screen devotion could become something truer. But slowly she discovered that reality was different, for Sam, though kind and charming, seemed to reserve his deepest energy for the world outside, for film sets and talk shows, for fans and premieres. And while she admired his success, the endless recognition he was earning, she craved something far simpler and far rarer from him. A question asked in quiet sincerity, a glance that revealed concern beyond the spotlight, words as basic yet profound as, "Are you okay?" or "Are you tired?" Those simple gestures of intimacy that form the foundations of real partnership. But Sam, always moving, always consumed by a schedule that demanded his body in one place and his spirit in another, seemed unable to notice the hunger in her heart. The hunger not for grand gestures, but for the ordinary tenderness of being seen. And each time he returned to a hotel after long days of shooting, collapsing directly into sleep without even a word of reflection, she waited for him, waited for a conversation that never came, waited for the kind of connection that made silence meaningful rather than empty, until eventually she felt herself living in what she later described in an interview as an asymmetrical relationship, one where affection and attention flowed unevenly, where her emotional investment felt weightier than his, and though she smiled, though she remained gentle and professional, a fracture had begun, and the quiet resentment built itself into layers too heavy to carry. When she later read back her own words in a published article, black ink spelling out her confession of feeling lost, her tears had fallen like rain, and Sam, too, had read those words, and though they were not spoken to him directly but to the world, they struck him as sharply as a blade, keeping him awake at night, his chest tight with ache, his mind replaying every scene of neglect, every moment of silence he had allowed. And still he did